Vision n'est pas difficile. Bon. Je suis désolée, ça sera comme ça. Ça marche. Ouais. L'anglais, c'est pas grave. Vous allez voir mon double menton et puis on s'en fout. Hein. Il faudrait que je retrouve sur le film. Écoutez, tant pis. Je suis vraiment fatiguée. Bon. Hello. Je vous préviens, c'est en anglais. We should at the outset distinguish the question what is music from some others with which it might be confused. One of these is the question of what kind of thing a piece of music is, that is to say, what ontological or metaphysical category, that is to say, particular, universal, mental, physical, it belongs to, and what its identity conditions are. This question, addressed in essays elsewhere in this book, chapter 4, 5, and 10, can to a large extent be dealt with independently of the distinction between music and non-music, and vice versa. We can determine what it is to count something as an instance or occasion of music without deciding precisely what ontological characterization pieces of music should receive. The second question is how we generally recognize something to be music, what criteria we employ in making judgments of that sort, by ear, in ordinary situations. It should be apparent that this is more a psychological question than a conceptual one. It asks, in effect, for typical features of music, which are orally accessible and prominently noted, that is to say, regular meter, definite rhythm, melody, harmony. But something might be a piece of music that lacked almost all typical musical features, and might possess many such features without being a piece of music. There are, furthermore, conditions essential to being a piece of music which are not even directly hearable, and which thus cannot figure as criteria of recognition. Nor, since our criteria for recognition are fallible, will everything that satisfies them in fact be an instance of music. A third question asks what it is that makes a piece of music good or great, or just better than some other piece of music. This question is clearly an evaluative one and should be kept separate from the fundamentally descriptive inquiry into the bounds of music per se, as contrasted with non-music. It has often been suggested that music be defined as organized sound, but this is patently inadequate. While sonic organization has some plausibly as a necessary feature of music, it is hardly a sufficient one. The output of a jackhammer, the ticking of a metronome, the shouts of a drill sergeant during a march, this chirping of a sparrow, the roar of a lion, the whine of a police siren, a presidential campaign speech, all are organized sounds, but not instances of music. Since I will ultimately retain organized sound as a necessary condition of music, a few clarifications are in order regarding my understanding of the phrase. First, I certainly understand it to comprise the organization of sound and silence, or sounds and silences taken together. There are very few imaginable musics, and no actual musics, for which silence, the space between sounds, would not be a structural principle. Thus, to spare a word for Cage's notorious 4.33, we can include it in music, if we like, as a limiting case of the organization of sound and silence. And this is made easier, of course, if we recognize that Cage has in effect organized for listening at a very abstract level the anticipated but unpredictable sounds that will occur at any performance of his piece. Second, and a piece such as Cage's, where organization takes the form of framing, illustrates this as well. The notion of organizing should be understood widely as covering what might be more idiomatically put in some cases as designing or arranging. Uh, a low-pitched wooden end blown that's another thing. The output, yes, we can prevent the roar of the lion and the chirping of the sparrow from being counted as music if we amend the initial proposal so as to require that the organized sound be humanly produced, or at least produced by intelligent creators to whom we might accord the status of persons. For it seems that one would not strictly consider anything music which was not the outcome of intentional activity on the part of an intelligent being. On the other hand, this may just be indicative of a deeper reason for excluding roars and chirps, that they do not exhibit the appropriate aim or purpose for qualifying as music. I will return to this point later. Even if we introduce humanly as a qualification to organized sound, wait, what, what happened? My page is turned alone. Okay. So, even if we introduce humanly as a qualification to organized sound, we are still left with various sonic items mentioned above which conform to this conception, but are not indeed instances of music. We might seek to exclude many of these, that is to say, the jackhammer output, the presidential speech, by insisting on those features of music which an elementary textbook of music considers definitive, that is to say, melody, rhythm, harmony. But that this will not do is brought home to us by early music, contemporary music, and music of non-Western cultures. Gregorian chant and shakuhachi solos are music but lack harmony, a low-pitched wooden end-blown flute used in Japanese traditional music. Hmm. Takemitsu's water music, derived from taped raindrop sounds, African drumming, and Webern's pointillistic five pieces, Opus 5, lack melody but are nonetheless music. Certain kinds of atmospheric modern jazz and synthesizer compositions have virtually no rhythms, yet they are music also. Melody, rhythm, and harmony are important features of a lot of music, but they nonetheless remain only typical features for music in general, not necessary ones. In fact, it should be apparent that there are no longer any intrinsic properties of sound that are required for something possibly to be music, and none that absolutely excludes a sonic phenomenon from that category. It might be thought that what makes African drumming, modern jazz, and Mozart piano concertos music is that they are all organizations of sound which stir the soul or, more soberly, affect the emotions, or perhaps ones that express the emotions of their creators. But although emotional evocation and emotional expression are central aspects of most music, they are not definitive ones. The roar of the lion and the whine of the police siren induce emotion in the auditor perhaps more surely than most music does. The orator's speech and the poet's lyric, possibly also the lion's roar, may express their creator's emotions as much as does the pathetic sonata. On the other hand, some music seems neither the embodiment of a creator's inner state nor a stimulus to emotional response in hearers, but rather an abstract configuration of sounds in motion and or reflective of some non-individual or even non-human aspect of things. Examples of this might be some Japanese gamelan music, Bach's Art of the Fugue, George Crum's Macrocosmos, Conlon and Cara's studies for play a piano, and Tibetan ritual music. So it is clear that music cannot be defined by some special relation to emotional life. No such relation holds for all music and only for music, nor can music be understood as humanly organized sound that transmits or communicates ideas or the like. For this net is far too wide. Though it may include much music, it also includes sirens, shouts, and messages in Morse code. It should be fairly obvious that what our preliminary definition lacks, and what is needed to get close to the concept of music, is some sufficiently general notion of the aim or purpose for which the humanly organized sound in question is produced. Music is such sounds produced or determined with a certain intent. But what intent is this? Since music, in the primary sense, is an art or artistic activity, and the arts are doubtless the foremost arena for aesthetic appreciation, it might seem that music could be defined as humanly organized sound for the purpose of aesthetic appreciation. Indeed, this is an advance over organized sound, but there are significant flaws in this formulation which prevent us from resting with it as an acceptable definition. One flaw is that there are musics in the world which do not seem aimed at what we can comfortably call aesthetic appreciation. Music for the accompaniment of ritual, music for the intensification of warlike spirit, and music for dancing are all examples of music whose proper appreciation does not involve contemplative and distanced apprehension of pure patterns of sound, or put otherwise, does not call for specific attention to its beauty or other aesthetic qualities. Another, perhaps more serious, flaw is the failure of the definition to exclude verbal arts such as drama and especially poetry. For poetry, at least in its spoken guise, consists of humanly organized sounds for aesthetic appreciation. It so happens that in that case the sounds are words meaningfully arranged. We can deal with the poetry problem by requiring that the organized sounds in music be intended for listening to primarily as sounds, and not primarily as symbols of discursive thought. This is not to say that music cannot contain words, clearly songs, opera, music concrete, and collage music too, only that to constitute music the verbal component must either be combined with more purely sonorous material or, if not so accompanied, be such that one is to attend to it primarily for its sonic qualities, and whatever is supervenient on them. The other difficulty is that regarding the ultimate end of attending to organized sound as sound, we need to find a replacement for aesthetic appreciation, since this is too narrow an end to comprise all activity that would count as the making of music. One suggestion would be this: that music, whether absorbed reflectively in a concert hall or reacted to frenetically during a village rite, is engaged in so that a certain heightening of life or of consciousness is attained. In other words, all sound phenomena that are categorizable as music seem aimed at the enrichment or intensification of experience via engagement with organized sounds as such. I claim that this is indeed the central core of the music-making intention. It is this that enables us to construe examples from any number of times and places as examples of the artistic cultural activity you conceive of as music, despite the absence of any limiting intrinsic sonic characteristics beyond that of mere audibility. An instructive hypothetical example that would not count as music, and which our definition in its present state just manages to exclude, is the following. Imagine a sequence of sounds devised by a team of psychological researchers, which are such that when subjects are in a semi conscious condition and are exposed to these sounds, the subjects enter psychedelic states of marked pleasurability. Such a sequence is not a piece of music, yet is humanly organized sound for the purpose, arguably, of enriching experience. It does not, however, seek this enrichment through requiring a person's attention to the sounds as such. Sound organized for our own good, but which does not ask us to listen to or otherwise actively engage with it, is not music. Now that our definition is approaching adequacy, we must add one minor qualification, making explicit something only implicit until now, namely that the organization of sound must be temporal organization if the product is to count as musical. What other sort of organization could there be? Well, one can imagine an art in which the point was to produce colorful instantaneous combinations of sounds, that is to say, chords of vanishingly brief duration, which were to be savored independently, each in splendid isolation from the next. My intuition is that we would not regard this art as a type of music, though existing musical knowledge and technique would be relevant to its successful practice. It would be the auditory equivalent of jam tasting or rose smelling, the receiving of a sensory impression, sometimes complex, but one for which temporal development was not an issue. Music, as we conceive it, seems as essentially an art of time as it is an art of sound. Our complete definition of music would then go roughly like this. Music definition sounds temporal um, DF sounds temporally organized by a person for the purpose of enriching or intensifying experience through active engagement, e.g., listening, dancing, performing, with the sounds regarded primarily or in significant measure as sounds. The point of this last qualification is to allow for cases such as that presented by well, such as that presented by rap music, where conceptual concept verbally conveyed may be of an importance at least equal to what is offered in the way of sound organization for its own sake. Perhaps rap music is not primarily intended to be listened to for its distinctive sonic, e.g., rhythmic, dynamic, timbral features, but these still constitute a significant, if not the most significant, focus of attention. I believe this formulation covers all that it should, e.g., classical music, folk music, party music, avant-garde music, opera, the varied, the varied phenomena studied by ethnomusicologists, and nothing it should not, including muzak. Sorry. Il tombe en plus. An interesting challenge to my proposal as it stands was offered by Jennifer Robinson in correspondence. Are kids, she asks, banging on pots and pans for fun, thereby making music? Well, we need to know more about these particular urchins. Are they aiming to have fun, that is to say, heighten their experience through attention to the collection of sounds produced, engaging, say, bodily or otherwise with the rhythms that helter-skelter emerge? Or are they mainly just blowing off nervous energy, exercising their arms, and above all enjoying the disrupting effect likely produced on others, adults in particular? If the latter, then there is no question of their being involved in music. If the former, then we may just have to allow music is being made, albeit albeit of an unsophisticated, but all but oblivious to tradition sort. But this seems all right to me. Some brief observations on the analysis, highlighting its salient features. 1. The analysis accords to music some intrinsic characteristics, albeit limited ones, to wit, soundingness or audibility, and temporal structure. 2. The analysis is intentionalistic and human-centered. It is people or the near-like who make music in a purposive way and not unthinking nature. 3. The analysis purports to be adequate in application cross-culturally, though of course it is not intended as an analysis of any other culture's concept. 4. The analysis explicitly ascribes a normative attitude to the makers or offerers of music. They necessarily conceive or intend their efforts as worth interacting with. By contrast, the definition offered of art in general in Chapter 1 above ascribes normative ends to art makers only implicitly. This feature, however, is in the end explicitly acknowledged in the revised formulation of Chapter 3. The analysis is creator-oriented or creator-driven. Producers make their production music through their intentional orientation in bringing it forth, and not the receivers or consumers of such production through anything they might do. Having proposed an analysis of music with a certain amount of specific content, we may not acknowledge that certain tendencies in recent music or would-be music, especially those beholden to performance art, conceptual art, and the most extreme laboratory serialism, might reasonably engender skepticism as to whether any certain circumscribable intent, any core beyond the sonic, can still be said to attach to all that goes under the name of music. In this skeptical vein, there is something to be said, it seems, for a definition of music modelled rather on that I have offered for art in general, to wit: X is music if it is humanly and temporally organized sounds intended for overall taking as any prime music is or was properly taken. Adopting this would in effect be allowing that music's essence, like that of art generally, had become almost purely historical, all traces of traditionally musical intent having been finally extruded. By marginalizing this reflection in the depth of a footnote, however, I am suggesting that we are not quite at that stage yet. 3. I now raise some further points about the concept of music. The first is that there is a distinction between what is music and what can be treated or regarded as music. One way to ignore this distinction is to claim, in the spirit of John Cage's Zen-inspired reflections, that any and all sounds are music. This is simply false, and the most cogent of Cage's reflections fails to establish it. What Cage shows perhaps is that any sounds can be listened to as if they were music, that is to say, attentively, with regard to form, with emotional sensitivity, that one can transform just about any sonic environment into an occasion for receptive awareness. It does not follow that all sound events are at present music. The whir of my blender and the whistling of the wind are not instances of music. They could only be such if they were produced or proffered for a certain purpose, as indicated above, but one can adopt attitudes toward them which are appropriate for music, with varying degrees of reward. This Cajun view of music connects to a use of music with some currency, in which the word serves as in effect a predicate of experience. The rule of usage is roughly this: if there is a musical experience going on, characterizing some phenomenological fashion or other, then there is music. If not, then the situation is devoid of music. The auditor, through having the right kind of experience, determines whether music is present or is occurring. The source of the sounds experienced in the appropriate way, their raison d'être, or even whether they actually exist, is regarded as irrelevant. A characterization of music along such lines is offered by Thomas Clifton in the opening chapter of his Music as Heard, New Haven, Yale University Press. It should